So I'm here with Dennis Wong of 2 Hour Aquarist. And hey, Dennis, how are you?
Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Very good, thanks. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so, I wanted to bring you on as our first guest ever on the newly launched Aquarium Everything podcast because I
I'm
wanted to
honored.
say, man, that I admire your brand. I admire your integrity. I really think that the industry, the hobby,
Mhm,
needs more leaders
mhm.
like you because I think the product is absolutely fantastic, and I look forward to discussing the product range in some detail with you on this
All right.
podcast. So, again,
Mhm.
thanks very much for joining us. So, for those that don't know you, maybe just give us a little brief background of just your involvement in aquascaping and how you came to start the 2 Hour Aquarius brand.
Okay. I started aquascaping, I guess, many years ago by now, and I think in Asia it is common for many households to keep fish, because fish is a symbol of good luck for the Chinese especially, because the word fish rhymes with the word wealth. Yeah, and that's
Right.
the reason why so many Chinese people see fish as a lucky pet to keep in their households. Um, from young, I was interested in like biology. And as you keep fish, you think of ways to improve the environment. And I guess that started the planter tank journey. And eventually, the cultivation of the plants overtook the fish. And I dove fully into the planted world. I think back in the day, uh, like 15 or nearly 20 years ago, um, a lot of modern equipment was still expensive in Asia. So things like CO2 system was tremendously costly. I think that the hobby as a whole grew a lot in Asia when China began producing cheaper equipment. So the rise of Chinese manufacturing, I think, actually spread the hobby and made it much more accessible in terms of cost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Eventually, I think I specialized, or rather, I became more well known for growing difficult and colorful plants. I do scaping, but I think that in recent years, I've been more known for as a plant specialist. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yes. Um, I created a tour Aquarius brand because I realized that even among the hobbies in Singapore, among local hobbies, there wasn't a one-step solution to fertilizing your tank. So there were brands that sold two bottles. There were brands that sold like you need to buy six different bottles for each element. Yeah.
I'm
To
painfully familiar with these 6 bottles,
yeah.
trust me.
Yes. um, and while having six bottles allowed one to dose the individual levels,
Right.
I think that for most hobbyists, a general solution that worked in one bottle would be a tremendous convenience.
Yes.
So I started by selling to a few shops, and eventually the brand grew and we exported to nearby countries. And it is still a rather young brand. This 2 Hour Aquarius formally is only about 3 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have grown rapidly within that time period.
Well, I have
Yeah.
to say that the you're absolutely right. The one bottle solution is
Yes.
it's a big deal as someone who has run an aquascaping gallery for many years. So at any one time, there's 20, 30 aquascapes going. And then
Yes.
someone who's also tried to grow the hobby, in a business sense, from a business foundation, you encounter so many of these obstacles, or I call them like barriers to entry for the new
Yes.
user. And
Yes.
being fresh from using the CChem line, for example.
Yes.
And
Yes.
side note, not to speak poorly of any brand. It's their philosophy, it's their approach. It's absolutely fine. But so many bottles with each thing broken
Yeah.
down in individual dosing. Even some of the testing that's required, especially like for the
Oh,
macros,
yeah.
to really get nitrogen and phosphorus
Yes.
correct, requires some
Yeah.
pretty frequent testing, etc. This is a
Yeah.
huge, huge barrier to entry for, especially for the beginner. So I just think it's so important that you figured out, somehow how to get it all in one bottle, and that it is so profoundly effective. Was this just a was this research driven, or just trial and error, or just really kind of
It was.
connecting the dots from a lot of experience? Or how did you get there? Because I just think it's such an important thing.
I think it's a mix of different experiences and connecting the dots. I think that, for example, when you look at who writes about fertilizing science,
Right.
um, the Western Hemisphere, I call it the Tom Bar crowd,
Right.
does it quite differently from the Asia side crowd. And I think that the a lot of the Western side crowd has, at least among the people who are customized using their own like salt solutions, they tend to be a bit more heavy-handed.
Right.
Yeah, while Asia is on the other extreme end where due to cost reasons and other factors, they kind of try to do as little as possible. Yeah.
Do you think that, would you say that the idea is to keep the water column, a more Asian philosophy, maybe a leaner water
I,
column,
I think
like?
that yeah, I think that that is generally the right idea, but lean in terms of which element,
Right.
right? Also the ratios and which elements can you push to have a higher concentration that serves a greater variety of tanks, and which elements one is more conservative with because it introduces less issues for the end user. So these are part of the our 2-hour queries, the APT ratio that makes it work well across a large range of tanks.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what I'm just fascinated by, the
yeah,
effectiveness of the product on, again, a huge range of styles, because again, aquascaping covers a huge spectrum
yes,
of uh, compositional philosophies, and we may have a real mixture of plants with a huge range of nutrient needs, and the
yeah.
ability to calibrate a single product just using a milliliter dropper. It's
Oh
just
yes, yes.
I'm just it and the reason, again, I was excited to have you as even our first guest on the podcast was I just think it's something that is so it's almost too good to be true sometimes. And it made me aware of my own skepticism, and sort of a cynicism about
Mm.
aquarium products in general.
Oh
Uh,
yes,
and having tried them all, I mean, from going back to the ADA way,
yes.
and more recently, the Tropica system, they have the green and the red. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, here's an attempt by a company that is, obviously so famous for growing
Mm.
aquatic plants. So surely they know
Yeah.
what they're doing and how to get the ratios right. And, maybe it's just certain variables in my program, but
Mm.
I struggled to really get it right consistently, even with the
Okay.
Tropica line.
Mm.
I even had a particular problem that, just out of curiosity, and something I just wanted to ask you about, because no one
Okay.
has ever given me any kind of insight on this
Okay.
thing, just wild
Okay.
theories. But uh, specifically using the Tropica Green, which I believe is higher in the macros,
Yes.
more
Or
nitrogen and phosphorus than the red, for example.
yes.
So
Yes.
we developed in every layout, every new layout at around the 3 to 4 week period,
Okay.
would have no algae to speak of. There
Okay.
was no other algae except
Okay.
one kind, and it was a stringy, a long, looks like a hair algae but thicker, more of a texture to it. So it's
Mm.
a filamentous algae that nothing would eat. I mean, you could put so many shrimps in, Siamese algae there, and no algae in the animal. The shrimps would not touch this thing. I mean, it would just grow out of control. You could have 90 centimeter tank with 100, mono shrimps, and they're not eating this algae. And like I say, no other algae to speak of. I came up with a theory over time that due to the supplier of most of our plants, because they were
Yeah.
coming from a relatively small handful of, we knew, Asian nurseries, that perhaps those plants were higher, infected, whatever, with the spore for this particular algae.
Yeah, I think that's like,
Yeah, and that something about the combination in the green tropica was activating this algae in particular. And I
yes.
say that because it came in every layout. Ones in the gallery, personal ones I did at home. I mean, it was coming up in customer layouts again, new layout using a green tropica, and once I switched over to Chem at the time. This was before I was really even aware of your brand. The problem went away. Now there was other problems of just usage for me with the Chem line, right? But the problem vanished, and so it's just something. I don't even know how useful of a question that is, but it speaks to sometimes these really odd things that can happen in planted aquariums, that it just feels like you're doing everything right. You're using what you feel to be a trusted brand, and you get into these odd problems. I suppose that could be some particular combination of elements or nutrients in the product that were activating this one particular algae. Does that sound like anything even plausible to you?
I'm surprised at the consistency at which it spawns. Yeah. So like Tom Bao often mentioned that when it comes to algae, to get it to spawn consistently itself is difficult, and that's
Right,
why discovering the triggers for it is actually difficult.
right.
If you can get it to spawn every single setup with that, I mean, for one, your methods must be very consistent. Uh,
Which mine are. I mean, I follow, when
yeah,
I get a
yeah,
system or a program going, I'm extremely dedicated to a very consistent, extremely overly consistent, maddeningly consistent. So,
I'm
yeah,
not sure though, off the top of my head. I know the formula very well, but I'm not sure exactly why that would happen. And from my own experience with it, I have not seen such a consistent outcome of using that fertilizer. Mm.
right.
It may be something that is in combination with your area's water supply that throws certain ratios out of proportion. It's
Sure.
possible.
We do use RO water. Um,
Okay, okay.
yeah, and we were using, side note, we've switched over to the APT Sky.
Oh, okay, yes.
And let me say, man, I know I'm like a 2 hour Aquarius fanboy over here now, but and not even to just sort of blindly promote the product. I mean, I'm telling you, as someone who runs an aquascape gallery, uh,
Yes.
it is another game changing product. Having used again a CChem product, I mean, I'm in the U.S., so obviously the distribution of a CChem products is, it's widespread, is everywhere. Um, And so we've just been using the Equilibrium product for
Oh,
years.
yes.
And
Yes.
oh my gosh, this thing is like, I don't know what the
Yeah, the
composition
salinity.
is, but
Yes.
we put it like into just like a plastic fish bag with some RO water, and just to kind of dissolve it. If you were just put it straight in the tank, it would be a disaster of just pebbles and white powder all over
Yeah.
everything. Um,
That's,
the refinement, just
yeah.
the refined nature. I'm just in awe of the APT Sky remineralization product. It is like three shakes in the bag of water,
Mm. Yeah.
totally dissolved, and
Yeah.
very clean into the aquarium. Very minimal. You might get a very light, if you do a huge water change and you're using a lot of product, you may get a thin layer of a very fine powder, may settle over areas where the current isn't strong, etc. But it's gone
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
short amount of
Quickly.
time. Really wonderful product, and one I did want to ask you about specifically, as
Okay.
far as and I as many people know, and I'm saying all the time, and it's been to my sort of it's been something that's held me back in aquascaping over the years, and I'm after all these years, I'm really just now embracing. But that's numbers, and not chasing numbers,
Ah,
but
okay.
understanding numbers, and then sometimes the actual composition of things I'm using. I was looking for someone to say, just put this much in, and your everything's going to be great. And as you know, that can get you close, but that's not the total picture. So, just out of some of this is just again my own curiosity. It's part of the reason why I even wanted to set up this format. I have so many questions for people in the hobby that I get to indulge my own interest. But so, does the APT Sky product contain these amounts of iron and potassium, like I believe the Equilibrium does? And if so, is the idea to use it in conjunction with a APT, 2 or 3, in order to strike that balance? Or what if people are mixing Sky with a different FERT, or
Okay.
still using APT 2 or 3
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
or 1 and 3, sorry, with Equilibrium or some other remineralization product, specifically in reference to that iron and potassium?
Okay. For APT Sky, we actually did not include potassium salt inside the mix because we wanted it as a pure GH booster.
Okay.
So, for example, for people that keep very sensitive stream, you can use it for the high grade CRS and your work because of its purity.
Okay.
Um, and potassium is a salt that changes the TDS. The potassium salt changes the TDS level a bit more than calcium magnesium salts. So, for example, if if you are a salty stream user, our numbers will match that more closely than, let's say, equilibrium. Um, and for very sensitive plant species, you can also overdose on potassium.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
there's
So,
this this is part of like
mhm,
aquarium mythology to me. I think sometimes are these
yeah,
notions that you hear it all the time, that potassium, oh, put all you want. It's very
that,
hard to overdose. It doesn't
no,
matter.
it's true. It is true for 97, it's true for probably 98 or 99% of species. But I can tell you the exact species that will be affected by it.
Okay.
Uh,
What
Amania
species are
species,
especially sensitive?
Amania,
Okay.
Amania. If you have a lot of potassium but your calcium and magnesium levels are lower, it's easy to get the tip stunting.
Okay.
Same for the picky Macandra species, like your mini Macandras and variegated Macandra.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Because those are ones
So it's,
I think I've struggled with in the past,
yeah. So,
and
so it,
that could be
yeah.
from, again, you're using an Equilibrium, which is a
Oh
high in
yes, of course.
potassium, and then you're dosing
Yeah.
supplemental potassium in some
Yeah.
kind of way and getting
Yes.
too high. So interesting.
I I think that a lot of the GH booster brands they add potassium to actually increase the solubility of the mix because they did not pick the correct chemicals for the calcium and magnesium salts.
Sure.
I mean, equilibrium, even with so much potassium, it is still not very soluble. Um, but the plus side of not having potassium or not having potassium salts is that you get a much concentrated GH salt. That means that if you are looking to remineralize just the calcium and magnesium portion, you need smaller amounts.
Okay.
Yeah, and most fertilizers overcompensate on potassium already. So unless you're someone that is totally not using liquid fertilizer at all in your tank, I don't think that potassium is necessary in a GH booster.
Okay.
Yeah, so that
Interesting.
is the reasoning behind that thinking. And if you do not have potassium in your GH booster, for certain species, you can also have a lot more GH without tweaking the potassium level at all.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So if we're
Uh,
using, if it's safe to say, if we're using APT Sky for our remineralization or our GH boosting, and
yes.
we're using the APT liquids, then
Yes.
this is something where you've sought to have an inherent balance in these
Yes,
elements
but
for the widest range of plants.
yes. But you can also use the APT Sky with any other liquid fertilizer, and it'll be fine.
Okay.
Whereas if
Because it's really
you,
just affecting a GH. It's not having,
yes, yeah,
it's not playing
yeah,
with other things that
yeah,
we'll get from
yeah,
other liquids or
yeah,
products
yeah.
so
Yeah, so we
much.
wanted to pinpoint that variable that lets people and let people adjust that independently of other parameters.
Okay. And
Yeah.
that's probably, is the exclusion of the potassium have something to do with what makes it so wonderfully refined and dissolving so quickly? Is that a,
No, I don't think so because
okay.
potassium salts are actually much easier to dissolve than calcium salts, especially. Calcium salts are the hardest salts to dissolve well.
Okay. Is that what's in the equilibrium that's got me like shaking for 5 minutes and then letting it settle
Yeah,
in the corner and squeezing, trying to mash it up
yeah.
and shaking some more
Um,
and then still getting a layer of little white pebbles all over the tank? This is just a
there,
different, obviously just a different blend that they're using.
I sense that their source chemicals are they may not have gotten the exact like granularity
Right.
right. Yeah,
Because it's over the year I've used it so long, and this is like shaking this bag of
yeah.
remineralization powder as a part of my daily existence. And
Yeah,
so I'm like painfully familiar with these variables, and and it would change. Some batches would be
yeah,
easier
yeah. And
dissolving, and
clumps.
some would be really just crazy, like you could never get it all dissolved. It would need
Yes.
to just dissipate in the aquarium. But anyway, so no, that's just yet another, it sounds like a small detail, but the fact that the product dissolves so easily, these are again, and I don't know if that's just how the product played out in terms of your composition and the
We
elements you
search for the
chose, but
chemicals to get.
these are the fact that I can have one bottle in a milliliter dropper and really calibrate my dosing very easily to get optimal growth. I mean, I'm just astounded by the difference. And then in terms of really encouraging, we really push for the use of remineralized RO water these days. I used to say, oh, tap is fine. We really encourage it, and I'm actually working on some different programs to make access to RO water for customers, et cetera, just much more convenient. But the fact that we can now have a product, at least in our market, maybe these things have been present in other markets a long time, but for especially the new hobbyist,
Mhm.
this kinds of things I'm going to measure out. I encourage the use of a inexpensive gram scale, just to really calibrate it. We do the calculation based on the amount of water changed, and but that we can so easily and quickly dissolve it, pour it in the tank, done. It clears up quickly. These are things that I would love. I think it's useful even in your marketing, etc. To point to those sorts of characteristics of the products, because it has made just a world of difference. I mean, we have far more people, coming in, interested in aquascaping, never done it before, etc. That when I can just show them this bottle, this powder, it's
Yeah, and
really
it's done.
important. I mean, it's really these are the real things for all of the talk about how to grow the hobby and getting more people into it, all of which we know is essential for so many reasons. Um, these are what you've created is this is a very effective. It's a very important thing because the all of the little nuances and subtleties that I think more advanced hobbyist, experienced people's been doing it a while, etc. They start you just get used to these variables that are, you just get used to it and you accept, well, this doesn't dissolve very good, but I have a little trick, or you're hacking things, or you've
Yes.
developed a feel, you have a feel now for things, and that can take so much time to develop. And so to be able to skip that and get people just to the part where they're uh, able to come home and have a simple, enjoyable experience with the layout is, I mean, isn't that really the
Yeah.
ultimate goal for most people at the end of the day? I always
Yeah.
joke, no one got an aquarium so that they could
Yeah.
tell their
Mango
friends,
chemical.
hey, come over, I've got this new pump over here, you really should come check it out. Nobody wants a pump. Nobody. you've got plenty of lights in your house. Nobody wants any more lights. You know, you want an aquarium for the enjoyment of that underwater scene, and your products are just, to me, just a very, very important step. And as someone again who's suffered through every major product line out there trying to get it right. I've had an interesting theory too that maybe you'd have some insight on. I'm almost certain you
Okay.
would, but on the ADA approach specifically. So I mean, I was ADA distributor for about 10 years, and so of course we're trying to use the Bright EK, step
Yeah.
one, two, three, etc.
Right.
And honestly, this product's never, they just weren't consistent. In some layouts they worked very well, in
Yeah.
some they didn't. I found it difficult to sort of get the dosing right, and I had a theory that it's that those products were developed so specifically in Japan,
Mm.
in the Japanese market with the Japanese water. And I know
Yeah.
from many trips to Nature Aquarium Gallery at ADA headquarters that they're using, you know, the tap water there is
Yeah. Yes.
fantastic. Is already great for aquatic plants. It's no wonder aquascaping. This
Yeah.
is its origin country, right? But and perhaps the liquids in particular, in conjunction with the aqua soil, of course, but that they're really sort of calibrated or optimized for the Japanese water conditions. So even if you were to take RO water and try to recreate the numbers as accurately as you could, as you know, water from the earth in a
Yeah.
given region or part of it is going to have a unique properties and molecular structures and things that no external product can simulate. And I just wondered because clearly it works so well for them, but I've seen a lot of people outside of Japan struggle. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that you are quite accurate on that. I suspect as well. But there are two angles to this. One is that because we are not on Japanese social media, you actually don't see the failures that come out of that system.
Okay,
Yeah, so
interesting.
it's not true that everyone has an easy time with ADA in Japan because now Toa Aquarist sells to Japan,
Right.
and people that have issues growing certain plants with the ADA system use our system there instead, and they see the
Interesting.
difference significantly. Um, and I think that there's also a very significant difference in approach. Um, this is again the Asia side versus the Western bloc. I think for a lot of the Japanese or Asian side tanks, people approach growth a bit more slowly.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that the ADA system is tremendously dependent on the soil for some of the key nutrients, such as nitrogen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you are okay to grow the tank slowly in, this means that you use a bit less light and even less CO2. You do not outrun your fertilization regime. Whereas I would say that for more power users or for people who want to complete scapes quickly, or are more impatient to see the very robust growth straight away. So, you pump in more CO2, more light. Then, like you say, the other regime then becomes inconsistent. It's kind of on the edge whether it can deliver or not. Yeah,
I see.
I I think the pro of the other system being soil dependent is that it's actually quite smart. Like I do think that shifting certain elements into the soil rather than having it in the water column is more stable. So I like to nitrogen feed my plants through the soil as well. Um, but um, I think such setups work best when it's a fresh setup. So when your soil is new, and the old Ada soil was powerful, the new Ada soil is weaker as well. So already we see that the if you use just the new ADA soil with their existing systems, the results are one level again lower than if you had the old ADA soil.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
and
noticed too.
they
Yeah, they're
haven't.
including the little the Amazonia 2 with the substrate
Yeah,
booster
yeah,
pellets, which
yes,
I've taken some layouts down. They were quite, you know, they've been running quite a while with that, and I maybe they're supposed to be that way, but when we remove the substrate, those pellets are still intact. I
Yeah,
mean, they haven't disintegrated. I'm kind of going, okay. I mean, it's ADA, so I have a tendency to just to trust them. I mean, at least as far as they more or less invented the thing, so I just
yeah.
tend to go, well, if they're adding this, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Are those just a very, very slow release? I mean, almost to the point of being
I I have not examined it in depth actually, so I do not
okay.
know.
Yeah, I was just surprised um, that after so long they were still hard as a rock and totally intact. It's something one imagines breaking down. Um, but no, that's interesting point. Is this? I feel like I know the answer, but I'm always looking for confirmations on certain things. That's
Okay.
because I feel like I can't remember where I heard this thing, and that makes me nervous sometimes that I'm just going with things that get said about
Yeah, yeah,
aquariums in general that become part of a narrative that we can't even remember where we heard it. But
yeah.
I heard this thing for years that, well, at least back when aquascape contest tanks maybe actually had red plants or stems in them, which
Oh
they
yeah,
barely do
yeah,
anymore, but that it would be a common practice for a competitive scaper to deprive the water column of nitrogen in order to bring
uh-huh.
out more red in plants.
Oh, it is
Is
absolutely true.
okay.
Yeah. I
So,
think it's a
but
practice that
so
is
on one
accepted
hand,
more
the
in the
nitrogen is driving the growth, but on the other hand, its restriction will sort of, is this like a stress response that's making it more red, or is just a natural outcome of reduced
I think
nitrogen? And
it delays the production of chlorophyll.
okay,
Yeah. But not for all species. It works for a handful of species. And actually, on our website, we got the exact list of what it works with and what it doesn't work with. The species that it works the most obviously with is Rotala rotundifolia.
mm-hmm.
That one almost requires nitrate limitation if you want the extremely deep rates.
Okay.
Um,
What would
oh,
be?
so
What's the timing of that? Like, when would one? Is it hard to?
it,
Is it just
yeah,
vary from tank to
no,
tank?
no. So there's a bit more complexity to it as well,
Okay.
because
Hard
when
to
it comes
say.
to
Okay, at 2 weeks before the photo, you need to
yes,
stop putting night. It does. It would be more based on your
yes,
particular system, etc.
yeah,
Would you
no,
consider
no,
this just
yeah.
a? Is this a trick? I mean, is this just sort of a hack of sorts to get the
It's not a
color?
hack. So my tanks are permanently run with low nitrogen in the water column, for
Oh,
example.
okay, okay,
But there's a bit more complexity to it. Because nitrogen is not just nitrogen. Feeding your plant nitrates versus ammoniacal nitrogen, whether through the root zone or water column, has a slightly different effect. Um, so let me think how to put this. Uh, Plants can store nitrate in their cells for future use, but plants cannot store ammonia because ammonia is toxic. However, plants to retrieve the nitrate to use it as tissue, it actually has to reduce the nitrate back to ammoniacal form. Then that process is energy intensive. So when you read plant growth studies of the terrestrial world, your plants always grow the fastest when fed with a mix of ammoniacal nitrogen and nitrate nitrogen. The
okay.
plant can store some of the nitrate for future use, but at the point of growth, if it has access to ammoniacal nitrogen, it gets a significant boost in growth. So to get the nitrate limitation rateness, you actually not only have to deprive the water of nitrogen, but it is best to also have a little bit of ammoniacal nitrogen available either in the soil or the water column, which is more risky. But aqua soils have that. That gives the plant the impetus to boost its growth rate, and yet when it tries to run, it is held back by the lack of nitrate nitrogen, and that will truly bring out the rates.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So for
Okay.
so for Ada's case, they have the perfect combination. They have a very um, they have soils that are very high in ammonia, or at least the old Ada soil did.
Right.
And yeah, and another interesting angle is that nitrates don't bind well to soil particles, but ammonia does. So most of your aqua soils, if they contain nitrogen, it will be in the ammoniacal format. Um, and while the external ammonia of the grains are quickly oxidized or used up by plants, uh, the deeper inside the grains, the ammonia can so-called stay in there, and plant roots can still reach it over time. Um, the combination of using very lean water column nitrate and yet having some ammonia in the soil gives the plant the ability to still grow at a decent speed. But as it tries to grow, the breaks start to come because there is no nitrogen available. So that
Nice.
combination is very good for nitrate limiting. Once you stop dosing nitrate in the water column, day by day your plants get raided for those species.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay, now I understand very clearly. So if
Yeah.
you were going to reduce, if you're using the APT product
Okay.
and you wanted to do this and you've been using
Yes.
the number three, uh,
Yeah.
which by the way, before I forget, what happened to number two? We go from a one to three. Where's the number two?
We left a bit of space in case we want like
Okay,
more slices.
perfect.
Yeah.
Very wise,
Yeah.
very wise. So, but if you took away, how would or do you go to just dosing number one for this time? You want to you want to take away the nitrogen? Are you just going to dose with a one for that period of time?
Okay.
If I,
So
let's
so
say I'm
there's a
trying to
bit
bring
of
out reds for a photo or something,
complexity involved also.
right?
So from a baseline angle, APT3 is by default kind of nitrate limiting because in a ratio compared to the amount of potassium and phosphorus or iron present, the amount of nitrogen is actually lower. So for
Okay,
example, in a unit of plant mass, nitrogen usually makes up of let's say 50 or 60% of the dry mass that is not carbon, um, then followed by potassium and phosphorus. So actually most plants are made out of, if you remove carbon, the next most element is actually nitrogen. So if you think about it that way, for every unit of nitrogen that a plant uses, it uses 1 unit, less than 1 unit of potassium, it uses less than 1 unit of phosphorus. So if you have a fertilizer that has an inverted ratio where I have 3 units of phosphorus but 1 unit of nitrogen, I have 3 units of potassium but only 1 unit of nitrogen. Nitrogen will always be the one that is a bit more limited. So APT has this, I would say, both courageous and weird ratio that many brands may not experiment with, where the element that is most used by plants is actually at a low level. So our nitrogen level is not that high in relation to the amount of potassium and phosphorus we have. So it is naturally nitrate limiting in that sense.
oh,
That's one angle.
okay,
The next angle is it depends on how densely your planter tank is. If you have a very dense tank, you can have the nitrate levels bottom out consistently. So that is where the nitrate limited species would uh, start showing the rates even with regular dosing. Then the other method that you talked about is you can either dose less because it does contain enough of the other elements that a half dose will work for many things. So that was also taken into account in part of the design. Or you can default to the APT0, which has no nitrates at all. So that's the more extreme solution.
okay. And then
Yeah.
I'm forgetting because I'm actually just now using it on a new layout for the first time myself. But the E,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
APTE. So if we
Yes.
really wanted to go heavy
Yes.
with the macros,
Yeah.
that's actually where we should be. Where
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
interpretation of the APT3 is going to
Yes.
be, we definitely have soil, CO2,
Yeah.
probably some variety of plants.
Yes.
This is kind of the covering the biggest spectrum of possibilities of
Yeah.
aquascaping,
Yeah.
and then the
Yeah.
one is again going to be generally a non CO2 situation, perhaps, or very low metabolism epiphytes and this sort of thing. I mean, that's been our approach to it anyway.
I think that one was we designed it also for tanks where there's a lot of livestock where you have so much N and P through the fish waste.
Okay, okay, all right, that makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Is the
Yes.
and then uh, another just personal burning question I had
Okay. Okay.
is the idea in a new layout. Let's assume there is a soil, CO2, and some variety of plants, sufficient lighting. Is the idea to start and let's just assume ADA aqua soil,
Okay. Okay.
newer version, Amazonia 2, whichever were kind of the most recent things. is the idea to use APT1
Yes.
for an initial dosing and then
Yeah.
phase over to say 3 long term? Would that be a normal sequence to follow?
Yeah. I think that that is the easiest sequence for most people. It
Okay.
is the one with the lowest risk, and it allows the plant to settle in without triggering any algae. I think that is a very safe approach.
Okay.
But if you are growing the most sensitive of plants early on, then that slight difference might make an impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yes.
oh, I'm
Yeah.
seeing more because when you speak of like sensitive plants, I am seeing more recently. Mostly, I think because of tissue culture, and now these plants can
Mhm.
actually be shipped because they were
Yes.
problematic for shipping
Yes.
in the past. Is why they were only traded amongst hobbyists, et cetera. But some of the
Yeah.
eriocalons, for example,
Yeah.
that my notion of those plants, the tanninas, et cetera, were like, oh wow, man,
Mm.
just avoid these things. They're
Ha,
really going to
ha,
be
ha.
too unless you're into growing plants. But if you're aquascaping, this can be, if they work, they're a beautiful addition to the scape's
Yeah.
composition. But uh, if they're just so unpredictable. But so is that a case where again you'd want to consider treating those? In other words, the more standard plants, let's just say things we all know and work with regularly, do we want to try and maybe calibrate our dosing to the, let's just say, the harder to keep plants? I mean, we're looking to kind of cater to them more so than because the other plants
Okay.
will adapt. They're
Yeah.
they they're less worried about what's in the water. They're just trying to live, whereas the sensitive plant needs a special attention.
Oh yes, yes. But I think that the number of those species that require the extra boost is really small, and many of the so-called difficult species, they are not actually difficult in terms of fertilization. They are difficult in terms of carbon dioxide, the amount of light you have. Whether like for Eurocolons, I think the easiest way to grow them is to root feed them.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have a good root tap or you have upper
APT
soil that
Jazz, for example, we're
oh yes,
really
yes,
excited
yes.
about the Jazz. Just started using it, and yeah, looks.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done
Because
this thing,
the
Dennis, where now you've got intense credibility. Let me just say, like we
uh,
you come out with a product and we're like, oh, it works. There's that, and that's a wow. That's congratulations on that, by the way. That's a very rare situation in aquarium products and industry to have a new product come out and we just inherently go, I'm already certain it works, as opposed to being sort of certain it doesn't work. And if it does happen to work, okay, great, it's a bonus. But because I have a vote of no confidence in so many products that, anyway, I don't mean to digress, but like I was very excited to see a proper substrate fertilization tab. But so you think for the Iracalons, even early on in a new soil, et cetera, sooner than we would normally use substrate fertilization,
it's fine.
hitting those with a product like APT Jazz
Yeah.
right at the base of the plant is would be beneficial.
Yes. But okay, so Eurocolon is one category because I think that Eurocolons, if you root feed them and you have strong enough light and CO2, they work quite predictably. But there are other species, for example, you've heard of the Hygrophila sp. Chai.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I've
So
had mixed experiences with that one. Mixed success.
so that plant, for example, is not demanding in fertilization. However, it's demanding in terms of light and carbon dioxide level, and as well as the overall stability of the location that it is grown. So it needs a clear space without competition,
Hmm.
with gentle flow and a lot of light and carbon dioxide. And because it's a slow grower, it needs to sit there for months to get mass. So
Okay.
that's difficult on another angle. It's actually not picky in terms of ferts.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's I guess I was tending to think in terms of plants like that, it's all about the ferts, but
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm
No.
probably just I'm doing sort of a baseline CO2 amount. I'm not really
Okay.
thinking, okay, let me let me drive it a little harder given those
Okay.
kinds of species. So no, that's very interesting actually. I can see
Yeah,
that being
there are a few species. The red Eurocolon is one of them. SP chai is the other, and also this plant called the blood vomit. I think you have seen it because it's been
sure.
around a
Yeah.
long time.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that all three of these they require closer to 40 to 50 ppm of CO2 to grow well.
Okay.
Yeah, so 30
Noted.
will not cut it. Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
is that a case where I guess that additional CO2 for, your standard stems and other
Oh
plants you
yes,
may
yeah,
have in there, et cetera,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
given they're in a proper shaded area, for example, Bucephalandra is not going to
yeah,
necessarily mind higher CO2. That they're more,
yeah,
they don't want to
yeah.
get too much light on them is mostly what I find. Um, so
I yeah,
driving CO2 to grow these specific plants is generally, we could say generally, not going to be detrimental to our other
yeah.
species.
The main concern is livestock.
Okay, right, of course.
Hello.
Did I lose you there? Did we lose it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We are back.
It's back. Okay, a little hiccup there.
Yeah.
We'll edit that out. But no, that's
I think the
that's
main
yeah, that's
concern
good.
is livestock. Yeah, not the plants. The plants are fine unless you want to grow certain plants more slowly.
Okay,
Yeah, because with
okay.
higher CO2, everything is a bit speeded up.
Is it safe to say that a lot of plants will adapt to a slightly more subdued, lower lighting level, and that we can? I mean, are we maybe pushing things with the brightness of the light a little too? Because this is obviously gets people into
Yeah.
trouble with algae.
Oh yes,
And,
yes.
and it's why I've been a proponent of what I call no one else has really adopted this term yet as a formal sort of approach or philosophy or scaping style, but I'm calling it greening. And my greening is when I do no soil, generally
Okay.
more intense hardscape,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
only epiphytes. And so
Okay.
this
Okay.
this this approach is actually this has become a very very popular with us, so much so that we're reintroducing the option of larger scale, fully planted uh, aquariums for our custom installation clients. We had sort of gotten away from that because in terms of the ongoing maintenance and all the variables involved in a traditional, soil, many species, we just found
Yeah.
for most of our custom installation and service clients where we're maintaining the aquarium, all those things that you need to have sort of a daily attention on the aquarium,
Yeah.
especially when it's new, very
Yes.
hard to manage. It worked
Yes.
back when I did all of them personally, but
Yeah.
over time that became just less and less practical.
Mhm.
But we've really dialed in this, again, just to give it some distinction in terms of its characteristics. I've just
Yeah.
coined this term greening because I don't feel like I'm not planting anything in a soil.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
roots going in anything.
Yes.
It's all epiphytes, attached to a
Yes.
hardscape. But the kind of the advent of that style and how we've gotten it down is really opening up. We actually have three rather huge custom installation aquariums
Mm.
going in that'll be that style. We had kind of just been doing aquascaping mostly in the retail space in the store. So, and again, the APT products have just the level of calibration we're able to get has really it's just been a game changer. It's opened up so many new possibilities because again, trying to get this kind of dosing is something many a client who knows nothing about plants,
Mm.
we can just say, oh, this many mils per day.
Yeah.
We'll probably go keep it on the lighter side of things and they'll be just fine. Whereas again, if I was trying to give them, all this bottles of a CChem range and they're putting this and that, I mean, this is obviously madness. Or you're trying to just dose once per week when you're
Mm.
there for service, etc. It's just not ideal. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so light control is obviously another thing that's been hugely
Mm.
beneficial in the style. As you know, most epiphytes are going to be just great with a more subdued
Yeah.
lighting, and then hence we're getting less algae problems
Yeah.
on the
Less problems as
hardscape, etc.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so is that a case where, let's assume no soil,
Mm-hmm.
very intense hardscape,
Yeah.
more attention on the hardscape for the wow factor. And then we're just going to work with our different Anubias, bucephalandras, ferns. Um, if we're going to have CO2, then I start to include mosses. I tend
Mm.
to avoid mosses in a no CO2
Okay.
low tech, only
Okay.
because I find they grow kind of a little more stringy, kind of wild. That
Yes.
you
Yes.
don't get the nice, tight, dense
Yeah.
growth on the driftwood. So
Yes.
we just is I always tell people the moss is not going to die without a CO2, but
But
it
it's
may
not
not
lush.
grow how you're imagining it, very idyllic on the woods and
Yeah.
everything. Uh, so in that situation, we're definitely already using a more subdued lighting.
Yeah.
Um,
I do think that for lighting, why lights have and lights today are much more powerful than like
yes,
every other year that passes, the light get more powerful.
yes,
But I think that this is because of competition among light manufacturers to show that for per unit there's more value if you buy my light kind of thing.
right.
Um, I think that for people that are looking for very intense color and very dense bushes, it is true that having more light helps,
Right.
but there's a huge downside to in terms of it is much easier to trigger algae and whatnot. And I think that it is true that most newbies make the mistake of basically over using too much light in their tank when they first start out.
Okay.
So the tank goes into, I call it the boom bust cycle, where things are good for a period of
I'm
time.
going to
They
steal
treat
that term from you, by the way. I like
yeah,
that. That's yes, boom
yeah,
bust.
yeah. And the biggest downside of that is that it wears out the hobbyists. So
Yes.
these people tend to quit after like a year or so because
Right.
the regime of maintaining such a high maintenance tank wears them down. Yeah.
I
I
see a
use a
lot of
lot of
that.
light myself. So my tank has about 250 to 300 par on the substrate. But
Are
it's
those the
because,
ADA lights I see there?
no, these are a China copy of other lights, but they make it
Okay.
better.
Yes. I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah.
Is that your sort of your favorite light right now? Do you have a favorite or kind of a go-to
I
light?
okay, I don't think that I don't think that this is usable by the retail market because the app is so shitty.
Okay. Yeah.
But I like the spectrum. I like the spectrum, the exact diodes they choose for the colors and stuff. So it gives very nice saturation without
Oh
giving a
yeah.
performance boost to
Yeah.
the tank. Yeah,
But the app is just, I see this all the time. The app is just,
yeah.
some of these
The app
apps, I'm
is
like, I don't know anything about writing code or making an app, but, I certainly know a good, UX when I see it. And I guess it's hard because
yes,
some of them are so terrible. I'm like,
yes,
really? Was it that? You couldn't have, just
yeah,
from an intuitive standpoint, I'm just going, wow, this is awful, and it could seems like it could have been better so much more easily. We are using a lot of the Chihiros, the
vivid,
Vivid
yeah,
Two or Vivid RGB,
yes.
which has been great.
But
It's at a
yeah,
great price point. It has a
yeah, yeah,
very nice controllability. The app is
mm,
pretty good. It's got a
yeah,
few
yeah,
quirks that once you figure it out, they seem to be working on improving it. And
yeah,
overall, I consider the app is
yeah,
pretty good. I do have an issue right now. I have dozens of them in the gallery, but there's three that do this thing. After they go off, they stay like a red,
yes, yes. So one
and I
channel
can't
is
get it
not
to
popping
turn
out.
off. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Maybe if I might need, I haven't tried a hard restart. Maybe if I do a hard unplug it and let it sit for a minute, and then
In some cases, it's the chip.
I
If
figured
you complain to the Chiros in the mainland, sometimes they do send you replacement chips, but you have to change the chip yourself.
that's
So
doable.
that
In other words, okay, I didn't know that.
that's doable. Yeah,
Okay,
you can
okay,
Google.
yeah,
But depending on which generation the lights produce, they have these small inconsistencies. Yeah, but it does come at a good power to cost ratio.
sure, yeah.
I find that they are actually a bit too powerful for most people.
You've got to
So
you end up really toning them down a lot. I mean, I've
yeah,
almost never used them at that full power. It's just it is
yes,
just too much. But it's kind of like having a car with a bigger
Yes,
engine, it's like, well,
yes,
the
yes,
power is there. You're not, it's nice to know that you have it.
yeah.
Um,
But many hobbies will end up crashing because of that, because they will use it like, since I bought an expensive light, I'm gonna use it at full power.
yes, you've
Yeah.
got. I even went through that. I thought, well, I'm just going to do epiphytes in this tank. I shouldn't even use this light. And I'm like, no, that's crazy. It's still. I love the color. I'm just going to tone it down. It's okay. You're not wasting the light by
Yeah,
not using it at 100% everything all the time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah, that's true. I did have just a couple other kind of just I think kind of rapid fire, just kind of faster
Okay,
questions too.
okay,
Um,
okay.
one of which is, and I think I've had Corey from Aquarium Design Group, Corey Hopkins, many of you may know, ask you some of these questions, sort of like, can you ask Dennis this thing? Because I'm just
Oh,
curious
sure.
about it. But
Okay, okay.
just to get it directly from you,
Yes.
often I'm doing my water changes very late in the day, pretty close to
Okay.
lights off.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I don't really see any negatives to that, but it just always made me wonder if that was in some way a poor strategy, and if I do the water change and the are going off in 10 minutes or
Yeah.
so, I finish up. Is it bad is there any harm in doing it near lights off? Number two, should I go ahead and dose some APT3, one, whichever I'm using, whatever,
Okay.
even though the lights are about to go off, or should I wait till the next day to put it in after the water change?
Okay. With regards to the water change question, actually there is a very exact answer for that.
Okay.
Yeah. The best time for a water change is actually before the lights come on.
Okay.
Because as you drop the water level of your tank, assuming you drop it enough and your plants are exposed to air, the air sacs actually get filled with oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it gives an immediate boost to photosynthesis in the light in your light window that comes immediately.
Okay.
And according to Barr, the impact is measurable. That means it is significant.
Aha.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
believe at the ADA gallery that they tend to do water changes much earlier in the day. This is kind of a
So
standard.
right. So
Yeah.
kind of right before would be, if you are the guy that's aiming to optimize every single thing in your life, that will be it. I don't, but
Okay.
Bar does that. Bar does that consciously. Like he
Sure.
water changes twice a week before the lights come on, and he says that during that growth window for that day, the plants grow a bit more. I do believe that. I do believe that they purr more for the window if you have air exposure just before. With
Interesting.
regards to dosing, I think that the average matters more than the 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 exact timing, unless you're keeping very, again, the extremely picky species. The one species that you'll see a difference is Ludwigia pantanal. If you have available ammonical nitrogen, whether it's it through the soil or in the water column, at the start of the light window, the plant redens through the day a bit more than if you did not time your dosing.
Oh,
So, but that's the only plant that I can think of where the reaction is can be seen on the day itself. The rest of the stuff, I'll say that if averagely you are dosing, it shouldn't. The timing is not something you should worry about.
okay.
Yeah.
But again, in optimal, it's good to know what it is
Yeah.
anyway. Would
Yeah, you
based
can
on
dose
some sort of
light on.
science would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
just prior to the lights coming on.
Yes.
I
And
have
well,
been doing it
yeah.
completely backwards then, but things still work. But I
Yeah.
do having so many layouts in a room at once. Obviously, you gain unique experiences and
Yeah.
observations, and I definitely have a thing where some layouts just don't. They're struggling a lot more. Even all of the things being equal, they can be very similar to another
Yes.
one in terms
Yes.
of uh,
Yes.
plant species and conditions. And this one
Yes.
is really having a hard time, and another one is just going so beautifully. I know some of that just comes with the territory, right? It's just part of
Mm,
this of this hobby, but um,
mm.
I do wonder if that's some of what I'm seeing could be those plants that don't.
There are
They
complexities.
right.
There are complexities. So, for example, the thing about water column dosing is that the elements that the plant get from the water column can be directly synthesized for growth in a quicker time than actually your elements from the root zone that takes time to actually travel up the plant. So certain elements, such as potassium, even for terrestrial plants, they have a preference for shoot uptake of potassium. So I'll say that potassium is very effectively dosed in the water column. Whereas, for example, when we talk about ammonia, it may not be something you want lingering in your water column in large amounts, but it binds with soil, so soil is the good place to provide it. And I think similarly, many plants have preference for iron uptake at the roots or phosphorus uptake at the roots. So for the plants that have a bias towards shoot uptake of certain nutrients, then if you do a water column dose as the light comes on, there's a
Okay.
slight drop. But I
Okay.
think that this is really a bit too much tweaking for most people.
Right.
That the average matters more than all this for the like 99% of hobbies.
Okay. I mean, at the end of the day, do your water change when it works for your lifestyle,
Yes,
and
yes,
it's not going to be that big of a deal, as evidenced by my doing them. Sometimes even
yes,
after the
yeah,
lights have gone off,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
set it very dim, but I'll keep it on because I'm trying to get to it. And it's,
Yeah.
it went off at 6 p.m. It's now 7 p.m. and I'm doing the water change, and generally things are fine, but again,
Mm.
good to know what optimal is for sure.
Yes.
Is it true that I didn't, this is one of those things I feel like I kind of made up a long time
Okay.
ago about aqua soil and the ammonia, because you've referenced the ammonia situation a few times
Yeah,
in the conversation. But so we know that at least original Amazonia, I think the newer ones is less so. But
yeah,
in the beginning, a lot of ammonia is coming from the soil.
yes.
Um, and I was under the impression that aquatic plants in general, they I would just use the very naive term. I would say they like ammonia, and that you were getting this
Yeah,
ammonia shot from the soil that that in an established aquarium that's been cycled, etc.
yeah.
The processing of the ammonia is such that the plants may never get such a large boost of ammonia again, and that
Uh-huh.
perhaps that
Okay.
was part of the necessary startup phase for an aquascape with a soil, this shot of ammonia that we were all trying to mitigate or eliminate.
Yeah.
Was by taking it away, you were taking away an important part of Mr. Amano's approach anyway, of like,
Okay.
let's give them a big boost of ammonia that they may never get
The
again to help
the
jumpstart things. Any truth to that?
no. So the amount of ammonia emitted by the old Ada soil is is excessive. It's toxic. I mean,
Okay,
essentially.
toxic, got it.
So I'll say that the tendency that you get stunted or you milk certain sensitive species is higher than the amount of ammonia that plants require is very, very small.
Okay.
And you can get virtually all of it from your root penetration in fresh aqua soil. So you really don't have to have it in the water column. So you can do as much water column change as you want.
So
Yeah.
the high ammonia in the original aqua soil was something that
Yeah.
was just a symptom or a byproduct of the source
I
material they
think
were working with. I mean, Mr.
it's a
Amano didn't.
byproduct.
He wasn't pursuing this high ammonia. It was just a consequence of the product itself. That
No, I
because he
think I
seemed to
think
have
that
so few
yeah.
problems that this toxicity, melting plants, all of this just seemed incredibly rare, which was another thing I attributed to, well, it must be some broader complexity of their water, etc.
Yeah. So
Because
ammonia
Mr. Amano was
toxicity.
not going to tolerate this melting plants all the time. He seemed to
The
figure out how
yes
to
and
not
no.
have that happen. Whereas I'm using aqua soil in the United States, and I'm being devastated by this, just the intensity of the soil for the first 30 days.
Yeah. So there are a few angles to this. One angle is that in Japan they do have very, very soft water. So with CO2 injection and whatnot, it is true that ammonia toxicity does decrease with lower pH ranges. So once you drop, especially the old aqua soils that are extremely acidic around pH 5 or 5 plus, virtually all your ammonia is in ammonium format, which is much less toxic, both to livestock and plants. So that's one angle. The other is that being a commercial gallery, the other people do water changes daily
Right.
uh, for the fresh tanks. So that also plays a part.
Which I did as
Um,
well. I mean, that's been part of our protocol forever, and what we teach
and
people too is a daily,
and when
very
you
frequent water change in the beginning.
and, and when you do see the other layouts over time, they are actually very they do change up plants. It's
Yeah.
not that it's a false assumption to assume that everything works out perfectly for every layout that they have done.
I see more of that now than I think maybe Mr. Amano himself used to do. He might have been more inclined to just do a new
Mm,
layout if too many changes were needed. But I've noticed even when in the ADA videos in the modern era when they'll show it just after planting and they show it after 3-4 months, whatever, when they kind of see it as optimal, and they'll even put a note sometimes in the video that certain species were changed.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes.
and we probably see more of that because they show more of that sequence of the just after
Yeah,
planting and then the kind of the completed vision.
yes.
Um,
And
but it's
and
true.
another, yeah,
Yeah, they do make
yeah.
changes.
Yeah, and another point to note is also I think that generally the other approach uses very sensible and hardy plants, the Crips and Nuvias, your Java fern. Whereas if you put Bucephalandra into an uncycled tank, the chance of it melting is much higher.
Okay. So you feel like
Yeah,
the boost in a new layout has
yeah,
a is
yeah,
it's one if you're going to use it, maybe wait until
yeah,
things
yeah,
have settled down a little bit. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
I've noticed that especially with the
yeah.
tissue culture Bucephalandra,
Oh yeah, yeah,
are they're
yes,
really melting, and I'm like,
yes,
boost melting? Like
yes.
what? This is crazy. But
Yeah. So it's an example of a plant that has low demands in terms of everything, but it likes stable tanks. So that
sure,
is the difficult angle to that.
that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, on that same note, do you have any particular insights? I recently had Lars from Tropica was in the United States. He visited the Aquarium Design Store ADG Gallery, and so I got to ask him a lot of this burning questions that I have about his
Yeah.
products and plants in general. And there was some things I just didn't get any kind of satisfactory answer on.
Okay, okay.
One of which is like the tissue culture plants in general, which I was a very, or using them from the very beginning of their availability. And I
Yes.
developed a real skepticism about them in the beginning because so
Okay,
many were melting. I mean, the melt
okay,
was like every time I'm using a plant from one of those cups, I'm going, this just may or may not work. That's just
okay.
true in any new layout, I understand, of course, but with the tissue culture,
Yeah,
particularly in
they're
the
even
early
more
days,
sensitive.
really, really bad. So
Yes.
now that there's so many more species, and some of this I feel like has been sorted out, but do you have any insights on why, if I've got 5 pots that appear to be from the same lot, they were grown at the same time, so I receive a shipment. Let's say I'm going to put five, 6, 7 pots of something in a new layout, and I'm actually experiencing this right now with tissue culture Monte
Okay,
Carlo.
okay.
Three pots worth totally melting. The
Yeah,
other
okay,
two is just fine and growing so well.
okay.
Uh, I
I
mean,
have a very, I have a very easy answer for that though.
okay,
The fact that they came in the same batch doesn't mean that they were manufactured in the same batch,
okay,
right? So three of them could have come from one batch. They put it in a box, but it's the end of a big lot. Then the other two came in.
sure,
Yeah. So I think that the age, transport, uh, tissue cultures are sensitive, and different TC labs have different hardening procedures. Hardening is the procedure where they acclimatize the plant to conditions that are more hostile than just the petri dish. So they are
okay.
supposed to expose them to drier conditions and such for the cuticle to develop a little. Um, Smaller producers sometimes scheme on that, or some species may be harder to. The time it takes might be longer. So the quality of TC, there is a lot of variation between brands,
A
between
lot,
shipments.
yes.
Yes, yes,
Almost too much to be
yeah, yeah,
consistent and reliable, and especially for the beginner to have this. You bought 10 pots of a tissue culture plant. Some of these can
yes,
be, 9, 10, 12, $13 per cup.
yeah,
Um, and, to lose some good percentage of those due
yeah.
to
Mm.
where there's not really an explanation for it, and I've never really gotten an answer other than, well, they're different. I mean, why would the same plant by the same manufacturer in different batches?
Yeah, yeah,
The
exactly.
consistency is what I'm pointing and going.
Yeah. I think that the control measure is also difficult.
Okay,
I think it's like for
so
your shop, you
it's
guys
less
probably
conditions. You're saying it's less conditions oriented in the aquarium and more something natively from production.
I think there's the production angle. There's the shop angle where shops may not store it correctly or they mix different batches. So some batches are very fresh and some may have been sitting around a long time and the the customers cannot tell a bad batch.
Yeah.
I think that for most tanks, if your tank is well cycled and biologically stable, your chances of succeeding with TC is much higher.
Okay.
But again, the most people do not have the patience or time to let the layout to just sit there to mature before they plant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you be more of an advocate then of maybe applying, if you were going to have a more tissue culture species
Yeah.
to add those later? Because I mean, I teach the
Oh,
way of
yes, yes, yes.
the
Yeah,
ADA way
yeah,
is always
yeah.
been, you are trying to finish the layout before there's even
Yes,
water and then fill
yes.
it, and then you want to bring that aquascape into form, and you're really
Oh,
not,
sorry.
I'm not
Let me
adding
get my
things and two
charger
weeks
for my
later I'm going
phone.
to add this.
Let me get the charger for my device.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Um, I forgot a little bit where we left off, but it's no big deal. Just edit that out. No big deal at all. But yeah, I did want to kind
Okay.
of just before we wrap it up, just switch gears just a little bit. And I'm
Okay.
curious, sort of outside the realm of dosing and your fantastic APT products, et cetera. Just you as an aquarist, as a person who's been in the hobby a long time, and of course is intensely involved with aquatic plants. Just what are your thoughts on the current state of sort of the contest scene, or where do you have any opinion on the influence? I should say the broader influence
Yeah.
of what we call a contest scape or the competitive aquascaping scene.
Okay. I think that the IPLC had a lot more standard when Amano was around. Um, I think that it got a lot more chaotic uh,
Sure.
after he departed. But with IPLC now comes a lot of other competitions as well. So like there's the CIPS one, there is the Insta
IIAC
competition.
and yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Indonesian
And I
scene
think that
has quite a
oh yes, yes, yeah,
quite a impressive list of their own contests as well. Yeah.
yes, 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 yes. I think that the good thing about competitions is that they drum up interest in the hobby. The downside is that most of these are photography competitions with all the weaknesses of a photography competition because essentially you're not doing a tank that you are escaping for the camera, which is a very specific goal with very specific lighting angles and in some cases photo editing to achieve the effect. So I think it also leads to maybe I'm not sure that unrealistic expectation is the correct term to use, but composing a tank for photograph can be quite different from composing a tank that is meant to be viewed in the
Yeah,
room.
definitely. And I think
Yeah,
it does tend to drive a
yeah,
little bit of some the initial inspiration for a lot of newcomers, beginners that
mhm,
they're coming in and they're already wanting to get out the glue,
yes,
and
yes, yeah,
all of which is completely fine. It's just it's. I think it might be more of a perspective thing for people who've been in it a long time, who've it's a new enough
mm,
endeavor at all, kind of the let's just say the kind of the Amano
yeah,
approach to aquascaping, which I've always said is not, this is different from a fish tank with plants in it.
yes, yes,
I love fancy goldfish. I know this may be cheesy in some kinds of ways, where I love all aquarium styles. I'm not I love aquascaping, but I also keep reef aquariums and hardscapes and cichlids and conceptual things and biotope and monster tank. And I mean, I'm real, I'm into, this is why I wanted to call it the Aquarium Everything podcast, so it could really be open to indulge all styles.
mm,
But of course, in freshwater, at least in the market, aquascaping is pretty clearly where I always say where the action is right now. I mean, it's just where the most
yeah,
people are going, wow, an
yeah,
aquarium like that would be so cool to
yeah,
have again. And yet, in an age where the
yes.
predominantly your influence or inspiration is coming from scrolling on your phone, where, again, the image is
Mm,
very small. It's been shrunken down to
yeah,
fit, which,
yes,
how this changes, the in-person thing down to the small, you
yeah,
reduce it to
yeah,
thumbnail size, and even escape this pretty
yeah.
compromised. It's like, wow, that's looking pretty amazing on my phone, right? So
Mm,
I guess my curiosity just comes from engaging with so many people coming into a store environment who's been
mm,
inspired or influenced by things they've seen on social media, online, on YouTube, etc. And a lot of the things that they're, if they've been doing any research at all beyond just passing interest, they've come across sort of the really progressive contest type of layouts, and then now they're seeing how the contest techniques are finding their way into even more
mm.
mainstream aquascaping.
Oh yes,
um,
yeah,
there's so
yeah,
many of
yes,
the
yeah.
top Indonesian guys, for example, who they've really been able to,
Yeah.
not unlike the Brazilian style, and they've really been able to make an
Mm,
identifiable style to their region and their resources, and I
mm,
think that's
yeah,
fascinating.
yes,
But you're trying to convey also that
yes, yeah.
people, you're not in that country, you don't have necessarily have the same resources. You're in the United States, different resource pool, and you may need to
Mm,
measure your expectations of what your layout can be based on things that are available to
yeah,
you.
that's
But
true.
then again, yeah, the
Yeah.
influence of the techniques, I think, is useful. But I think a lot of us
Mm,
that's watched it from the very early days can't help sometimes but go, wow, like you say, post Amano, it it got things have gotten into a realm of hyper focus for the camera, like you were saying, and I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know if there's not really a point to
But
the question. Is more just to, I just always have a curiosity what other people that have been around and that are in markets
I
like yours too,
yeah,
where
I
there's a
feel
lot
like
more
it's the
resources,
Instagram.
and the hobby's much bigger there than it is in, say, the U.S.
Mm, yeah. I think it's the Instagram generation. So this
And
whole
now a
picture
TikTok
focus
is,
thing,
where it's at
uh,
now.
yeah, it flows with the time. Um, like if you don't have a picture to show what you're
Right,
doing, is it even
right.
real? mm, but I think yeah, I want to look at the
Sure.
positive side of things. Of stuff like you have mentioned. Having individual characteristics to different areas, and I think that is one thing that does separate, or there's a merit that freshwater aquascaping have to differentiate itself from saltwater. Um, so like saltwater folks always say that, oh, we have more colors, more interesting
Yeah, not
creatures,
so sure.
stuff like that. But yeah,
Right,
but we have aquascaping, and that is
right.
truly very different. The ability to create like environments, this art form does differentiate itself very well from the
Yeah,
saltwater
truly.
folks.
I'm always,
Mm,
it's become a kind of a standard reference now, but there's the number of our reef customers who come in and they're so intrigued by aquascaping
mm,
because they
yes,
see, they went to
yeah,
the reef side for the color and the otherworldliness of it, and
yeah,
all of that, but they see the depth and the sophistication of
yes, yes,
aquascaping, and they're
yeah,
very intrigued by it. And the number of them too that say, well, they've very successful growing SPS coral, etc. And but they tried their
mm,
hand at a carpet in a iwagumi or something, and
mm,
they didn't pull it off. Even though now I always say the equipment is so simple, it hasn't changed in 30 years really. The fundamental system of aquascaping is very
yeah,
well
yeah,
established. Whereas in a reef
yeah,
aquarium, oh my gosh, there's a new gadget every day coming
yes,
out.
yeah,
New lighting, new
yeah,
this, new that,
yeah.
which is part of what drives that side of the industry. But yes, it's just a point of interest for me. I'm always curious and it's a pretty consistent thing. I think we find that I think it's the over sort of
production of the layout for the camera for that final shot. And I'm a huge advocate
yeah.
of requiring, and we're actually playing with the idea of launching our own contest with a very, very different set of category and a very different set of submission guidelines. And I would require because in these days it's very doable, in the old days not so much so, but a short video clip.
Yeah.
So I want to see some
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah,
I want to
yes.
see a clip.
Yeah.
I want to see a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
We don't need to go around, but a little walk around, and because you've seen some of these guys, their contest setup, is just on a plywood and concrete blocks, and the
Oh,
lights
yes,
are
yes.
poorly hung. I mean,
Yes,
it's
yes.
it's a
Yeah, yeah,
pretty
yeah. Exactly, man.
crude looking situation. But what's inside that rectangular
Yeah.
frame is the only attention,
Yes.
as it should be. We wouldn't be judging on
Yes.
your broader system. You wouldn't even have to show that. But I want to see the fish swim. I want to see a little bit of
Yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
the reality of it, because I've had more than
Yes.
one occasion, and I wonder if
Yeah.
you've ever noticed this, where you see a video of a contest tank, or sometimes ADA would have a top placing person shoot a video after the contest, and they'll be doing it from in front of the tank.
Yeah.
And you're seeing it in person
Yeah.
is looking kind of weird sometimes. I'm sort of like, and I go back to the photo,
Yeah,
I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And I'm
seen,
looking at the video, I'm like, it looks a little weird, Um,
yeah, I've seen many of these tanks in person, and I've
right.
seen those videos as well. And it's true, a lot of the tanks are either poorly maintained, or they really
Yeah.
work for only one angle. So you feel a bit cheated if
Yeah.
you see the real stuff.
Which is, it's all fine. A contest is what it is, and things evolve and become categorically kind of
Yeah.
their own thing. I'm totally cool with that. I'm sort of longing for an alternative sort of presentation mode, which is what the contests have sort of become,
Yeah.
that anybody could submit
Yes.
to. And you're attempting, let's just say, a higher caliber work. You're attempting, it's just not just everybody showing their plant. That's
Yeah.
what you do on your own Instagram page. So some kind of format, and there is some sort of sense of, people, credible people choosing the most extraordinary works. But I'm really dying to see more than just a mono photograph, format
Yes.
in there, because it just lends itself to too many technique things that I think are just a little outside the boundaries.
Yes. Yeah.
I always notice too, having gone
Yeah.
to some nature aquarium parties and sitting in the big auditorium there when they would do the the official unveiling of the contests
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
And they would have Mr. Mono would always be just one of the judges, which I always thought was funny. I was like, no, Mr. Mono should be the judge, but whatever. But they would go down, and you would often get some commentary there from each judge. And I always thought it was interesting. Mr.
Yes.
Mono's favorite tank was almost never the winning one. It was usually further down the line, and that he made it pretty clear
Okay.
too that if you read between the lines, you could see he wasn't a fan of the sort of overwrought sort of this
Yeah.
intensified
Yeah.
hardscape thing,
Yeah.
which with a lot of
Yes.
Ricardia and mosses and some Pinatophyta hygrophila here and there. He didn't. He obviously he passed before that really got its the momentum it has now. But even in the first presentations of that, I always noted that it didn't strike his fancy anyway, which is fine. Again, we need to
Yeah.
evolve everything. I totally agree with that. Do you feel like maybe it's become a little bit stagnated, perhaps? Like a little bit, like right now I'm seeing everything is a shadowy, dark, the deep forest with a scene in the background of little trees. Is just a recurring theme
Yeah,
at this
yeah.
point.
I think the recurring themes get copied because that's the easiest. To copy is the easiest way to get a high level work without having to think up the subject matter from scratch.
I always wondered, the analogy probably doesn't hold up, but if you were a race car team, and your race, and so you are consistently beat by another team, you're trying to look to what they do to win. You're going, well, what are they
Yeah,
doing?
yeah,
What's their suspension? What are they doing with, how can we get some of what they got? The problem is when you do that
yeah.
with creative
Yes.
endeavors, there's a certain monotony that becomes
Mm.
part of it. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So I do think that while competition encourages, basically people to produce more works, the downside is that people also try
right,
to game the competition. Um, I think that Amano was truly, the nature style skater where the naturalistic aesthetic, I think was the feel of the nature was very, very important to him. Whereas the diorama works, those with very pinpoint precision, like you say, the little trees in the background lined up perfectly, then those will always seem a bit
right.
artificial at some
And
level.
so I find it interesting that
Yeah.
when I ask this question of kind of colleagues or people that they're in the industry, they've been in it a long time, et cetera. The takeaway is that not they're seeing sort of a lack of things evolving, or again, kind of the reference to what won last year is what I should do this year if I want to win. And these little details that are almost
Mm, mm.
it's not a we're not is not a making a mockery of it or anything, but there's a little bit of a sense of come on, can't we can do better than that, right? Or like there's little trees in the back, we're
I,
starting to make fun of it
but,
now. And I'm kind of going, so
yeah,
why is that still going on, but
I, I have a very pointed comment about this. Um, and my comment is that the reason why we see so many of this is that the judging panels are not of very good
right,
quality,
I agree.
and therefore they have failed to find the truly defining works, and they go back to what they
Thank
think
you.
that the
Yeah, I
this
agree with
yeah,
that. And
yeah,
it seems
yeah.
random. I
So
think it
yeah,
was a tweet from a while back that I remember reading of yours, where you kind of
and
pointed to this situation. And
yeah,
sometimes it's a commercial
yeah.
interests, and who gets to be on the judging panel is
Mm.
not
Oh
necessarily
yes, yes.
representative.
And yes, and I know that this sentiment is shared by a lot of the truly great
Right. It is. That's
aquascapers.
my point. That's a
The
shared view, and yet
Fukada,
I'm going,
yeah,
and yet I keep seeing kind of the same thing happening.
yeah,
And when it's such
yeah.
a great format for the possibility of truly pushing the limits or evolving it, or but no, that is, I forget about that sometimes. You're absolutely right. I think it gets down. I mean, somebody is continuously rewarding the sameness
Yeah,
factor.
yeah,
And
yeah,
if you have
yeah.
a judge, I mean, ultimately this has to lie sort of in the hands of that panel. So that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. So if you scrutinize the works, I think that I mean at least for me, I find interesting works, but they are not in the top 10 or top
Always,
20
my favorites are
sometimes.
always down the line quite a
Yeah,
ways. And I understand the
yeah,
complexity of trying. How does one actually rank objectively? Over 1,000 entries.
yeah. So, and yeah, and if you think about it, if you penalize, if you choose the standard template, what you're also doing is you're actually
Right.
penalizing creativity.
Yes.
Right, so being a bad judge is doubly bad because of that. Because not only are you showing the same stuff year after year, but the good stuff, the people that produce the creative or new stuff, they get discouraged.
Well, perhaps the solution to this is just well, if you don't like it, go make your own. And maybe you've given me another layer of encouragement to maybe do our own contest and set
Yeah,
things up a little differently. And
yeah.
um, I would certainly
Mm.
be inviting you to be on our judging panel, Dennis. That's for sure. Um, so in somewhat relation to that, I did have one other question, and again, some of this stuff I'm just indulging my own curiosities here. So if it comes off as
All
uninteresting to
right,
an
that's
audience,
fine.
I
Yeah,
apologize. But I'm someone who has long held just a profound appreciation and a reverence for Mr. Amano, for the ADA brand, at least in terms of its history and kind of that it gave us what
yeah,
a product range to support aquascaping would look like from which we could grow. Um,
yeah.
and so, because we can trace all the origins to pretty much one single individual, Mr. Mono, um,
Mm,
I'm
Yes.
always fascinated by others who knew him or were active in his era and etc. Uh, what your sort of perception or vision or opinion, just what your opinion is, even of the brand itself being such a cornerstone brand in the hobby and industry in the post Amano era, uh, just what you sort of see or feel from the brand as they continue without his massive influence.
I felt that the I mean the great thing about the brand was that I think that Amano truly managed to achieve his vision, like the sense of nature and aesthetic. And I think that that's why Ada did well and why it contributed so much to the hobby. I think the downside of it, and maybe partly because it was a Japanese company, is that I think that after he departed, there was a vacuum of for who should be the some kind should be the next like
Right.
kind of art director of Ada. So if you ask me like which scapers do I associate with ADA now that Amano has passed on? I can't name of like three very people that I look up to in terms of what they produce and say that oh yeah, now Ada continues
Would would
because of
would would, would
the work they
Yasuki
do.
Homa be one of those that you would count on that list? Is he? I consider him pretty influential guy.
Also, I know him by reputation, but I'm not such a
Okay.
big fan
Okay.
of his works. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. I mean, if you ask me honestly, I'll say that it's a far cry from Amano, unfortunately.
It's true.
Um, yeah. So, and again, unfortunately, everyone will be measured against the yardstick of that legacy. So I think it's not easy being in his position or for anyone to carry on the reins of
Right.
the company.
Such an
Um,
interesting position for them to
yeah,
be in, and it just is kind of the brand
yeah,
that, at least if
yeah.
you've
But
been in it a while, that you look to
yes,
for the next thing.
yes,
Uh,
yes, yeah.
to see
I
these guys that have taken it
I felt that.
somewhere, the they've continued on, but man, what a challenging situation. And I guess I'm just sort of fascinated by others' perceptions of sort of how that's played out.
I felt that Amano he overshadowed or dominated a bit too much when he
Sure.
was present as well. When he could have groomed the younger team. Um, yeah, I feel that all the other skippers were thrown into this when Amano passed. It was like quite a sudden
Right.
thing,
They
and
weren't really, the company was
mm,
just proceeding on a trajectory it had from the early
yeah,
days. And
yeah,
which that raises an
yeah,
interesting point for me, just
yes,
if I kind of introspect right away when you said that I've probably done a similar thing, at least in terms of the gallery and sort of what we're doing in there, just because
mm,
I've always done it. And so, and really just in the past few years, I've got guys on the team now that are very capable
mm,
aquascapers. Corey Hopkins being one of them. We
mm,
have another young guy with us, Austin Kwan, who's I think he's going to be really up and coming. Very passionate guy, very humble, not promoting himself like some high-minded scaper who works at Aquarium Design Group or whatever on social media, etc.
mm,
Um, and yeah, this idea you just
mm,
kind of gave me another nudge in that direction of kind of sharing that and letting these guys have a
mm,
foundation or an environment to
yeah,
develop, and not this
yeah, to grow into.
overshadowing thing just because we were all doing it in 2002 or something. And so before a social media, before so much has changed and have kind of been there from the beginning, sometimes you do get
Yeah,
stuck in your old patterns. So
yeah,
that definitely gives me something to kind of consider, because I think you make a really valid point that the level of uh, just from getting to know Mr. Mono personally, I noted that about his overall sort of presence in the context of the brand. It was,
yeah, yeah.
he was the president, and
I mean,
he was a pretty firm guy
yeah,
in terms of how he ran things, what he wanted, which, like you say, the success was
mm,
in fulfilling the vision. I mean, I think he really did get
mm,
pretty close, if not on target, which is so challenging for any brand to kind of fulfill the vision. And then
Yeah.
just there was just a certain justice in him being able to complete the big installation there in Portugal,
Oh yeah.
literally just weeks before his passing. To finally to finish off
Yeah.
with such a sort of a crown jewel was it was justice anyway on some kind of level. If he had to be taken from us, early like he was, but. Yeah, very interesting points. Well, Dennis, we've gone a little over my original time I had planned, but it's just been really fascinating, man. I've learned a
It's
lot.
fascinating.
Seriously, an area I've needed a lot more engagement, and kind of just needed to really deep dive into some of the numbers and the philosophies. And just to circle back and say, man, I really am so impressed by the 2 Hour Aquarist line. The website at 2houraquarist.com is it is a go-to reference for us. It is literally the only, so we get to customers all the time that after some consultation or engagement with us in the store, they're asking, is there any resources or online a website? And we exclusively, there isn't a second one. The 2 Hour Aquarist site is one that we send everybody to. Your overall philosophy and principles are right in line with what we do. There's nothing on there that we sort of disagree with. In other words, it's a really nice alignment of what you're saying, the techniques you're touting, the presentation of the numbers and the science side is very easy to understand. It's as deep as if you want to go deeper, it's there, but if you just need to understand the basics, it's there. And I just think it's so important. There's still so little of that out there, honestly. It's either sort of the same video about we're going to put in the soil and then the hardscape and then put the plants in with the
Yeah.
tweezers and then fill it up, and then some time passes, and to where I kind of go, I don't know how much more of that we really need on a YouTube of the how to make an aquascape. That's well served is what I'm saying. And what you're bringing to me is a really vital area, very important. And from the standpoint of a retail store who's trying to focus on aquascaping, these are really super valuable tools. And I can't express my gratitude enough for the work that you've done, and just the fine-tuned nature of the products themselves. I say they're the right tool for the job, and I'm in relentless pursuit of. So thanks very much, Dennis, for being with me here on the inaugural Aquarium Everything podcast. It's been great. Thanks for all you do, and hope to speak to you again.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me, and it was a
Thank
pleasure
you, man.
talking to
It's
you
great.
as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. We can have future sessions. We have more projects coming up in the 2 Hour Aquarist. Some of them may allow further collaboration with retailers like yourself. When we develop those ideas further, we will definitely let you know as well. And we are also restarting our video filming. I departed from that because it requires a lot of time. But I think that like a segment of people that don't read websites and they only look to YouTube for instruction. So I feel like we have to translate the information into videos for that group of people, to reach that group of people. Yeah. So that is
The idea of going to a website to get information is becoming it's less common these days. Their first stop is YouTube,
People read
social media. I would encourage you to, on that note, side note, to consider also, not exclusively, but also considering Rumble. I don't know if are you familiar with Rumble? Many people have not heard of Rumble.
No,
Now,
I have
Rumble
no
is a
idea.
really up and coming competitor to YouTube. And it's growing quite
Oh,
rapidly.
really? Okay.
Which I've also heard people that's in tech tell me, well, you'll never
Mm.
beat YouTube because they have control of all the servers and all this kind of technical stuff. But
Yes.
it is a really growing
Yes.
video platform. And many of the YouTubers are moving
Okay.
over there, but they compensate the creators better, all this kind of stuff. But I've just been trying to spread the word
Okay.
that there is a emerging and it's getting some real momentum in terms of an alternative or another destination for video content. Check out Rumble. But one other question, and I may
Yes.
just edit it back in at a different point in the podcast that I did want to, that I would be
Okay.
upset if I didn't ask you about, was just the APTF product. Yes.
Yeah.
And is this exclusively designed to be dosed or used, let's say, directly on a hardscape in the way that we would have traditionally used like hydrogen peroxide or some? Okay.
Yeah, you can use it that
But
way.
does it have any application for
Yes.
algae treatment, just putting it directly in the water column?
I think that in higher concentrations, and some of our customers have tried that. The thing that I don't like about that approach is that you tend to use a lot
Right.
more of the product, which is not good for
I've noticed
the
that. Yeah.
livestock and the microbiology of the tank. So we always advocate spot dosing.
Can you get it on when you say spot dose, is
Uh,
that with the plant exposed to air, water drained down? Okay.
no.
In tank,
In
so
tank.
I'm
So
just going to get as close
I
as I
think
can to the algae and the leaf in the water
yes,
and kind of give it a blast.
yes, yes,
Like if I was target feeding a
yes,
coral or
yes,
something like this, I'm going to get in there and go, kind of like
yes,
right on it. Okay,
yeah.
okay. Would that be the primary
Oh, yeah.
application that you developed it for?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Yeah. That's why all of our products come with that little dropper, so to make it easy for
right.
people to squirt
Okay.
the spot directly.
Because yeah, in this way, it's unlikely to negatively affect the plant or the leaf itself.
Oh, yes, yes.
But if you
Yeah. So I've used it on like CRS tanks, and the streams are fine. So even for a bit more sensitive livestock, the
Okay.
spot dosing
So
method
just
works
recently
well.
I used it because I'd used a peroxide and it didn't work as well as it sometimes does. It was on a Frodo stone. You know this Frodo stone from
Okay.
Adam Piscala in Poland, right? So,
Yes.
which it has a very strong capacity to get like discolored. I mean, different water chemistries and lights and algae get in there. It's harder to get off like with a brush or wire brush. So, especially in a new layout, it gets its first kind of patina of algae, and sometimes it's really though is completely green, and is very embedded. And the hydrogen
Yes.
peroxide didn't work. But what I ended up doing was using the APTF, but this is a
Yes.
whole the
It
whole
will
mid
drive.
ground of the tank is a rock structure. So there's a lot of rock in there. And so to go with the
Yeah.
water down as low as I could get it, and I haven't it's so new there's not fish in it
Yes.
yet except for algae eating shrimp, ocats, and some Siamese algae eater. But I had to use quite a bit of product, even though I'm using a milliliter dropper, and I'm just making sure I get a light, covering on the rocks.
Yeah.
Now it's super effective. 48 hours
Yeah.
is like a brand new rocks.
Yes.
But I did
Yes.
lose
Yes.
some livestock as a result because I've probably got a lot of product in there that I filled the
Yeah.
tank up. It would maybe be a good idea to when you fill to maybe
Oh, so
drain
yeah.
it and fill it one more time to dilute it or flush it out.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that
Okay.
works. So you can, yeah.
So this
Yeah,
kind
exactly.
of approach of like if I
Yeah.
have a lot of hardscape that needs an algae treatment, is it because it works much better, let's say, than a peroxide does.
You can use a
Okay.
spray bottle as well.
If a little bit, if the plant, like if
that
there's
also
an
works.
area of moss growing on a rock and this rock needs a treatment, because we want to keep it off of
yeah.
the moss.
So for that yes, because for this algicide is a bit more strong, so it affects the moss. But we are coming up with one that you can actually use
Oh,
on
wow.
moss. So that we are introducing another version of fix for delicate
Wow.
plants and
Okay.
stuff in a while.
I look forward to that because this kinds of ongoing maintenance techniques and practices and the products we use for it is just really important part of the program. So that's great, because I do sometimes struggle, especially if there's already livestock in the tank. You just want to be so cautious, or if you're prescribing it to a customer who doesn't have a lot of experience with these things.
Yes.
Making sure they understand and get it right.
Yes.
So,
Yes, so we are coming out with a version that I'll say that is nearly as effective, especially on filamentous algae, for mosses and more delicate stuff, and that it has it is less damaging to both livestock
okay,
and plants as a whole.
awesome. Very much look forward to that, as I do to any new 2-hour Aquarist products, because they've all been a home run, man. I really mean that, and it's why I was just super excited to have you as our first guest on the podcast. So again, Dennis, thank you so much, man. Fantastic conversation, very informational, and I just look forward to talking to you again in the future.
All right, we can arrange again.
My
Thanks for
pleasure,
inviting
man.
me,
My
Jeff.
pleasure. Thank you.